Mr Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring a bill to enable clergy of the Church of England to conduct same-sex marriages on Church of England premises in certain circumstances and for connected purposes. As I'm sure colleagues are aware, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Church of England has grappled with the issue of human sexuality for many years. It's nearly 18 years since the passing of the Civil Partnership Act and 10 years since the Equal Marriage Act. The Church of England opposed both these reforms at the time. It's since changed its mind on civil partnerships, but still opposes equal marriage, won't allow same-sex weddings in church, and requires its own clergy in same-sex relationships to be celibate. The Methodist and United Reformed churches in England conduct same-sex weddings, as do the Anglican or Episcopal Church in Scotland and the established church in Scotland, the Church of Scotland, as well as several other provinces of the global Anglican Communion. The most recent opinion poll, commissioned by The Times and conducted by YouGov in February, found a majority of the public and a majority of Anglicans support marrying same-sex couples in church. People who know the private views of the bishops better than I also believe a majority of them support treating lesbian and gay Anglicans equally. But in January, after 6 years of formal discussions in the Church through a process called Living in Love and Faith, the bishops recommended to the Church of England's General Synod that there be no significant change to the current rules. Instead, they recommended allowing some limited prayers of blessing for people in same-sex relationships, although not a blessing of the relationship itself. And they promised a review of the current rules regarding the clergy. This was a bitter disappointment to many Anglicans and their families and friends. I quote from just one of the emails I've had about my bill today. Susanna wrote, "I'm a lesbian Christian who's worked in the prisons and as a teacher and a registered nurse for 40 years. I've tried to lead a decent and caring life, but my church has refused to marry my wife and myself, and I find that deeply demeaning. I've engaged with over 50 bishops trying to get them to allow freedom of conscience on this at local church level. The recent decision to continue the ban was devastating, and my wife no longer wants to be part of an organisation that discriminates in this way. We're so grateful for your support in introducing this bill." You might ask, Mr Deputy Speaker, why this is a matter for MPs and for Parliament. Well, the Church of England is not just some sect. It is the established church in England. Yep. It was established by Parliament and still has its church or canon laws approved by Parliament. The monarch is its supreme governor. Its bishops are appointed by the monarch on the advice of the Prime Minister and sit in the other place. It runs thousands of schools across England. And with these privileges of establishment comes a duty to serve the whole nation, to be there for all citizens. As constituency MPs, we will all have had experience of the special role played by the Church of England in our nation's life. In times of tragedy and celebration, the Church's doors are open to all in our communities. And personally, I value this role, and I believe that most Anglicans and parliamentarians do too. But when the practice of the Church in how it treats its lesbian and gay members persists in being so out of step with the country as a whole, that established status is bound to be questioned. The former Conservative MP and Second Church Estates Commissioner, Sir Tony Baldry, recently called for a bill just like this one to be introduced into Parliament. He noted that when Parliament in 1919 relinquished most of its responsibility for church legislation, it was not envisaged that there would be a major issue of doctrine or practice on which church and state would diverge. But during the 20th century, as society and indeed attitudes inside the church changed, differences did emerge over the treatment of divorcees, for example, or the role of women in the church. On each of these, the church did eventually adjust to the new reality, but not without a gentle nudge from Parliament. We did that most recently over the decision to allow women bishops, when, for the first time of asking, Synod failed to approve the change. Parliament, through the Second Church Estates Commissioner, made quite clear to the bishops that this was an unacceptable state of affairs, and the following Synod approved the measure, and Parliament legislated to fast-track women bishops into the other place. Parliament nudged the Church then, and a gentle nudge is what this bill intends to do now. It would allow, in certain circumstances, those priests and parishes that wish to to conduct same-sex weddings, a solution similar to the one governing the remarriage of divorcees or whether or not a parish should be forced to have a woman priest. I've seen some conservative evangelicals and other opponents of equality claim in recent days that this bill amounts to an attack on religious freedom or Parliament legislating on doctrine. It is neither. The bill is deliberately drafted as permissive to allow those who wish to move forward in certain circumstances, and such circumstances could include the prior approval by synod. Many would like Parliament to go further, including my own local priest, a traditionalist, who nevertheless said to me after Mass following the heated debates in synod in February, Parliament should just get on with it. Well, Parliament could get on with it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but this is not the intention or necessary consequence of my bill. My preference, and I imagine the preference of most colleagues, would be for the Church to do this itself. A vote at February's synod to allow same-sex weddings was very close among the clergy and the laity, and it's quite possible that once blessings are allowed and the world doesn't fall in, things could move rapidly in the next few years. Yet currently, the Church of England is prevented from conducting same-sex weddings, even if it wanted to, by the so-called quadruple lock to the Equal Marriage Act. This bill could, should Parliament wish, simply remove that lock, meaning the Church would not have to come back to Parliament again as and when it decided to change its own doctrine and practice. Of course, discussion about the potential impact of this bill is somewhat academic, Mr. Deputy Speaker, given it has no chance of becoming law. The main motivation in tabling it is to encourage the bishops to stick to the commitments and timetable agreed by February's synod and resist any delay or backsliding at the next synod in July. There has been sustained pressure from a vocal minority inside the Church against the very modest proposals on the table. Some conservative provinces in the global Anglican Communion have disowned the Archbishop of Canterbury, and a small number of homophobic parishes here have stopped paying their diocesan contributions in protest. There is a small minority in the Church of England who will never be reconciled to treating gay and lesbian people equally. They are holding the majority back. The Church leadership should stop indulging them and focus on their primary mission to the majority of Anglicans here. That might also make it easier for them to focus on the many important things the Church has to say and offer about the 21st century. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am immensely grateful and humbled by the range and quality of the co-sponsors of this bill. They include the Right Honourable Members for Romsey and Southampton North, Swindon South, Derby South, Hull North, Leeds Central, the Honourable Members for Milton Keynes South, Brighton Pavilion, St Albans and Rhondda, and both the mother and father of the House. I apologise to those who wanted to be sponsors but didn't make the list, but I'm only allowed 11. I hope this bill serves, if nothing else, to give hope to those still waiting for change, like Susanna and her wife, and sends a clear message to the Church of England leadership where Parliament stands on these matters, and I commend it to the House.
The question is that the Right Honourable Gentleman have leave to bring in his bill. Mr Andrew Selous.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I do not intend to divide the House, but it is necessary to respond to the bill in my capacity as Second Church Estates Commissioner, because it seeks to usurp the role of the democratically elected General Synod of the Church of England, as well as to remove the freedom of the Church of England to decide its own doctrine, a freedom which members on all sides of this House champion for religions and beliefs all over the world, and one that we should therefore apply equally to the Church of England. Now, there are passionately held and differing views about same-sex marriage on all sides of this House, and I'm also acutely aware of the personal pain and hurt that this issue causes for so many people. But it is for the democratically elected Assembly of the Church of England, the General Synod, to decide matters of doctrine rather than Parliament. And this has been the settled convention for nearly 50 years since the 1974 Worship and Doctrine Measure was approved by Parliament. At the General Synod last month, it was agreed that the prayers of love and faith proposed by the bishops would be finalised, that the pastoral guidance for clergy would be produced, and that a welcoming culture towards LGBTQI+ people would be embedded throughout the church. It was also agreed not to change the doctrine of marriage, and that motion was passed by a clear majority in all three houses of the Synod. And amendments to require the bishops to bring forward proposals for same-sex marriage to the next meeting of the Synod and to revisit the issue within the next 2 years were rejected by the House of Bishops, the House of Clergy and the House of Laity. The Right Honourable Gentleman's Bill proposes that the decision of the Synod, arrived at prayerfully and democratically, should simply be set aside. In this House, we do not all agree with each other, but we do respect everyone's right to be here because we've all been given our mandate through the same black boxes on election night. And I would ask that members of this democratically elected House show the same respect to the democratically elected members of the General Synod. Directing the Church of England on doctrine is not the job of Parliament. It would infringe on settled principles of religious freedom, which we argue for our sisters and brothers overseas, and it would call into question the rights and protections of conscience for other denominations and faiths as well. Several Catholic members of this House came up to me after the urgent question on the 24th of January and told me how grateful they were that Parliament was not telling their church what to do. The bill is also unnecessary, as should Synod decide to change the doctrine of marriage in the future, it could do so. It would produce a measure which would come before Parliament and amend the 2013 Marriage Act. There is no need, therefore, for Parliament to act independently to change the Act. Although the bill is intended to be permissive and not to compel any member of the clergy to solemnise same-sex marriage, it is just not possible to leave it to individual clergy to choose to do things that are clearly contrary to the doctrine of the Church. Doctrine is not determined by local decision, varying by parish or diocese, but is decided centrally, not by a small group of bishops, but through the prayerful deliberation and decision of the democratically elected Synod. If the Church lost its ability to require compliance with its doctrine, this would be a breach of the Human Rights Convention, as it would be contrary to Article 9, read with Article 11, for the state to interfere with a religious organisation's ability to require compliance with its own doctrine. The bill's attempt to give individual freedom and choice would be unworkable and would breach the long-standing convention that Parliament does not legislate for the internal affairs of the Church of England without its consent. Now, I honoured my commitment to tell the General Synod the views of Parliament as expressed in the urgent question on the 24th of January. And I know that the General Synod will continue to listen carefully and respectfully to the views of this House, just as I would ask Parliament to be respectful to the views of the Synod.
The question is that the Right Honourable Gentleman have leave to bring in his bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Dame Margaret Beckett, Hilary Benn, Sir Peter Bottomley, Sir Chris Bryant, Sir Robert Buckland, Daisy Cooper, Miss Harriet Harman, Dame Diana Johnson, Caroline Lucas, Caroline Noakes, Ian Stewart, and myself, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Yes.
Mr. Ben Bradshaw.
Same-sex marriage, Church of England bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 24th of November, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Friday the 24th of November.